Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Wednesday, August 28th, 2024. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. Russia says the U.S. will face harsher consequences. So Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov said on Tuesday that the U.S. would face much harsher consequences for backing Ukraine's offensive in Russia's Kursk Oblast. Ryabkov said, quote, "The impression is that our colleagues in Washington have discarded the remnants of common sense and believe that they can do anything. The consequences for the United States could be much harsher than those they are already experiencing. They know where and in what areas we are reacting in practical terms," end quote. So when he talks about the consequences that the U.S. is already experiencing, not exactly clear what he's talking about. He could just be referring to the fact that Russia is gaining ground in the Donbass and is succeeding on the battlefield there. Maybe also the strikes on Ukraine. Maybe there are some things he thinks that is affecting the U.S. directly as a result of this proxy war. So when it comes to this Kursk offensive, the U.S. claims that it was not involved in the planning, but it has allowed Ukraine to use U.S.-provided armored vehicles, missiles, and bombs in the attack on Russian territory. I know that I've been going over this a lot lately, but this is really a huge, escalation of this proxy war. The fact that the U.S. is actively supporting a invasion of Russia is a big deal, and we should talk about it a lot. This was a few days ago, but I just saw this today that the New York Times reported that the U.S. and the U.K. have provided Ukraine with satellite imagery and other information about the Kursk region. And as far as I understand it, if they're using the HIMARS rocket launchers, that means that they need intelligence from the U.S. to carry out those strikes. So that's a very big level of support that the U.S. is giving Ukraine. Ryabkov said that U.S. involvement in the Kursk offensive is an obvious fact. So Ukraine is now pushing hard for the U.S. to allow it to launch long-range strikes inside Russia using U.S.-provided missiles. So Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, he also made some warnings to the U.S. on Tuesday. He strongly warned against the U.S. letting them do the long-range strikes. And he said that the U.S. should understand that if World War III breaks out, it would not be contained in Europe. Lavrov said, quote, "Americans unequivocally associate conversations about the Third World War as something that, God forbid, if it happens, will affect Europe exclusively," end quote. So saying that it will also impact the U.S. So we've seen Zelensky say that his Western backers are naive for worrying about Russia's red lines, saying that the Russians are bluffing. You got nothing to worry about. Give us these missiles. And we have seen some reaction from Russia, the heavy missile and drone bombardment on Monday. They kept up strikes on Tuesday, pretty heavy strikes across Ukraine on Tuesday, which is kind of their typical reaction to attacks inside their territory. They usually ramp things up when it comes to bombing Ukrainian infrastructure. We'll see if they do anything beyond that and how this all escalates. And so while the heavy fighting continues in Kursk and heavy fighting continues on the eastern front inside of Ukraine in Donetsk, where Russia has been making more rapid gains since the Kursk offensive started. So concerning stuff here. Another story that is definitely concerning. The IAEA chief warns of a threat to the nuclear plant in Kursk. So Rafael Grossi, the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, that's the IAEA, led a mission to the Kursk nuclear power plant in Russia's Kursk Oblast, which was invaded by Ukrainian forces on August 6th. Grossi warned of the danger of a nuclear incident amid the fighting in the region. He said, quote, "The danger or the possibility of a nuclear accident has emerged near here," end quote. The IAEA visit came after Putin said that Ukraine had fired drones at the plant, at this nuclear plant in Kursk. Kiev denied the charge from Russia, but Grossi did say that he saw evidence of nearby drone attacks that were close to the plant. Grossi said, quote, "I was informed about the impact of the drones. I was shown some of the remnants of them and signs of the impact they had," end quote. So Grossi warned that this nuclear power plant was more exposed than most modern nuclear power plants because it lacks a containment dome and a protective structure over it. He explains it. He said, quote, "This means that the core of the reactor containing nuclear material is protected just by a normal roof. This makes it extremely exposed and fragile, for example, to an artillery impact or a drone or a missile. So this is why we believe that a nuclear plant of this type, so close to a point of contact or a military front, is an extremely serious fact that we take very seriously," end quote. So Grossi has also previously visited the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, which is in Ukraine, and that is in the Zaporozhye in the south. That was captured by Russian troops in like the first couple days of the Russian invasion. I remember when it started, you saw this like security footage from the nuclear power plant of Russian soldiers coming in and like, seeing soldiers taking over a nuclear power plant, it's definitely makes you concerned about a potential nuclear disaster. So the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant has been the frequent site of Ukrainian shelling and drone attacks. The plant, but mostly the area around the plant. There was recently a drone that injured a power plant worker. So there's always, the risk with that plant as well. But this one in Kursk seems to be more exposed. All right, so the next one here, Zelensky claims that F-16s were used to down Russian missiles. This article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said that his country deployed F-16s to help repel a massive Russian missile barrage. It is the first time Kiev has confirmed using advanced American-made fighter jets. During a press conference on Tuesday, Zelensky said, quote, "We destroyed already some missiles and drones using the F-16, end quote. So as far as I understand it, only 6 Ukrainian pilots have actually completed their training on the F-16s, and they need 2 pilots to fly each plane. So that means only 3 could be operational. But they're saying that they are using these U.S.-made jets, and this was a big escalation of U.S. support for Ukraine. This is one of those things that the U.S., Germany, strongly ruled out. They said that they didn't want, they wanted to avoid World War III. That was the kind of rhetoric we saw from NATO officials when they were saying why they didn't want to send planes, didn't want to send tanks, but then they end up doing it anyway. And so that is why when we talk about the long-range strikes, just because the U.S. is saying no for now doesn't mean that they're not going to take that next step. All right, so the next one here, Israel kills 41 Palestinians across Gaza. So on Tuesday, Gaza's health ministry said that Israeli forces killed at least 41 Palestinians in the Gaza Strip in the previous 24-hour period. The ministry said, quote, "Israeli forces killed 41 people and injured 113 others in 3 massacres of families in the last 24 hours. Many people are still trapped under the rubble and on the roads as rescuers are unable to reach them," end quote. So Israeli strikes were reported across the Gaza Strip in the north, the south, and central areas, including Khan Yunis in the south, Deir al-Bala in central Gaza, and Gaza City in the north. So across the whole strip. And remember, the area that is that Palestinians have been forced into is only about 11% of the territory. Those are the so-called safe zones, but of course we've seen those get bombed throughout this thing. So amid this latest onslaught, Israel announced that it rescued a Bedouin man who was taken captive by Hamas on October 7th. So this is 52-year-old Qaid Farhan al-Qadi. The Israeli military said that they rescued him from a tunnel in southern Gaza. Al-Qadi is a resident of Rahat, which is one of the few Bedouin towns, Arab Bedouin towns in the Negev desert that is recognized by Israel. There's a lot of villages, Bedouin villages, that Israel doesn't recognize. They don't give them any kind of assistance or anything. So this guy was working at a warehouse in southern Israel near Gaza when he was captured on October 7th. You see the picture here, the aftermath. I mean, the horrific aftermath of Israeli strikes in Khan Yunis that destroyed several houses. This is a picture from Reuters. Gaza's health ministry said that the latest slaughter brought the total death toll in Gaza since October 7th to 40,476, which includes over 16,000 children. The health ministry's numbers are considered a low estimate since it does not include the 10,000 people who are estimated to be missing and presumed dead under the rubble. And it's also unclear how many Palestinians have died due to indirect causes. There are some estimates of how many Palestinians might have been killed, factoring all those things in together. There was that recent letter published by The Lancet, by a group of experts in the British medical journal The Lancet, that estimated that the total number of indirect deaths, of deaths, including indirect deaths, could reach 186,000. And they got that number based on the death toll from the end of June, which was about 37,000. So that's already gone up quite a bit. So their estimate would be adjusted and would probably be over 200,000 now. And then there was a group of American doctors and nurses who volunteered in Gaza. They wrote a letter to President Biden, and they estimated that the death toll has already exceeded 92,000, or 4.2% of the population. All right, so the next one here, a Palestinian paramedic's ordeal in Israeli detention. So this is a report from Human Rights Watch. They spoke with Walid Khalil, and he was a paramedic who worked in Gaza, and he was captured by Israeli forces. According to his account, he was going to driving his ambulance to an area where he was dispatched to, and that he saw 4 men being executed by Israeli forces. He said that he hid under the ambulance, and then he went into a nearby building. The Israeli forces raided the building, captured him, did the whole thing. They stripped him naked. They sent him to this torture camp. And some of the stories that he tells are very, this is just more of these just horrific accounts of what these prisons are like. He says one soldier pushed the muzzle of an assault rifle to his head. Another doused him with gasoline, threatening to set him on fire, and others drove a military vehicle quickly toward him as if to run him over, a tactic that another former detainee separately described to us, apparently to terrify him into confessing to being a member of Hamas. Israeli soldiers then transferred him to the Sedi Taiman military base in southern Israel. He said that at that detention facility, Israeli soldiers dragged him on the ground, removed the cuffs on his ankles, dressed him in adult diapers, and removed his blindfold. He saw he was in a large building like a warehouse with chains hanging from the ceiling. Dozens of detainees, also in diapers, were suspended from the ceiling with the chains attached to their square metal handcuffs. He said that personnel at the facility then suspended him from a chain so his feet were not touching the ground, dressed him in a garment and a headband that were attached to wires, and shocked him with electricity. He said he was getting electric shocks every second day, so they're torturing him and trying to get information out of him. He said at certain points he was taken in for interrogations, and he was given a drug, an unknown drug in a pill form. He didn't know what it was, but he said it made him feel very, very strange. And he said that they told him while he was there how many children he had. They told him the names of his children and where they live, basically threatening to kill his kids if they didn't give him information. Knowing that, I wonder if this is part of the targeting, that they intentionally kill the family of some of these prisoners. So there's other horrific stories about rape. He said one man that he was next to was bleeding from his bottom, and that he told him that 3 soldiers took turns raping him with an M16 assault rifle. More. We've had a lot of allegations about the rape, and then of course that case and video has proved that there is sexual abuse like that going on in this facility. Just completely horrific, all being supported by the U.S. the U.S. taxpayer, I should say. So the next one here, the U.S. slams China as Sullivan visits Beijing. So we got a few China stories today. On Tuesday, a U.S. Coast Guard admiral criticized China's activity in the South China Sea as U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan was in Beijing to meet with high-level Chinese officials. Rear Admiral Andrew Sugimoto, deputy commander of the U.S. Coast Guard Pacific Area, said that the U.S. stands with the Philippines in the South China Sea, where Chinese and Philippine vessels continue to have frequent tense encounters despite efforts to cool tensions. Sugimoto's comments came after Chinese and Philippine vessels collided near the disputed Sabina Shoal twice within a week. On Monday, there was another encounter, no collision, but another one of these encounters. So the U.S. has taken the Philippine side. Both sides blame each other, obviously. And the U.S. is saying that it unequivocally condemns China for ramming the Philippine vessels. So this admiral said, quote, China wants to be seen as a member of the world that has its set of rules and enforces it. But whenever they do things like ramming or water cannoning unarmed vessels, it does not appear to be so, end quote. The U.S. has vowed that the U.S.-Philippine Mutual Defense Treaty applies to attacks on Philippine vessels in the South China Sea, which means the U.S. is pledging to intervene if the dispute turns hot. This is why we cover this. Sugimoto said the U.S. Coast Guard, which has increased its presence in waters near China in recent years, would stand with the Philippines if the treaty was invoked. So that's right. The U.S. Coast Guard is active in the South China Sea, is active in the Philippines. They've gone through the Taiwan Strait recently. You might be wondering what the U.S. Coast Guard is doing near China's coast. He came out at this press briefing and said all these things about China. At the same time, Jake Sullivan, Biden's national security advisor, is in Beijing. He began 2 days of talks with Wang Yi, China's top diplomat. The Biden administration has taken a hard line on China and has framed its talks with the Chinese government as a way to manage the relationship rather than improve ties. You see this in their rhetoric, that they're not even really saying, oh, yeah, we're going to work things out. They're saying, we're trying to responsibly manage our competition. Sullivan said, quote, President Biden has been very clear in his conversations with President Xi that he is committed to managing this important relationship responsibly, end quote. Wang noted the rocky state of U.S.-China relations and said his goal is to move forward with healthy and stable ties. Wang said, quote, the key is to keep the overall direction of mutual respect, peaceful coexistence, and win-win cooperation, end quote. So I want to mention today our sponsor for the show is the Expat Money Summit. These guys were our sponsors last year as well for the 2023 summit. This is the 2024 summit. And this is the world's largest offshore event taking place entirely online from October 7th to the 11th, put on by Mikkel Thorup, the host of the Expat Money Show, and a highly sought-after expat consultant with over 2 decades of experience. At this summit, you will discover why international diversification is a must for those looking to preserve their liberty and wealth. Learn everything you need to know about crafting your perfect plan B, where it is easy to get a passport, how you can get a passport in another country. Headline speakers include Dr. Ron Paul, Doug Casey, Scott Horton, Tom Woods, Mark Faber, Tom Luongo. So if you want your ticket, which is free, go to expatmoneysummit.com. That is expatmoneysummit.com. Expat is EXPAT. Lots of good information here. I know that there are a few expats that listen to this show and people, I'm sure, who are interested in this. And really interesting work that Mikkel does, and he's a fan of this show and of antiwar.com. I did his show, I think, last year. And also, if you want to get a VIP ticket, there is a link in the description where you could get $100 off your VIP ticket. If you get that, you get there's all these VIP panels that you can watch. I'll be on one of those talking about the risks of World War III and all of that. So go to expatmoneysummit.com or click the link if you want the VIP ticket, or you could put in the code anti-war. All right, so back to the news here. The next one, Taiwan is building bases for U.S.-made anti-ship Harpoon missiles. So the South China Morning Post reported on Tuesday that Taiwan is building 5 new military bases to house U.S.-made Harpoon anti-ship missiles. So in 2020, the U.S. approved a $2.37 billion arms sale to Taiwan for 100 Harpoon coastal defense systems and 400 Harpoon missiles. So this is like a land-based version of the Harpoon missile. And Taiwan is scheduled to receive the land-based missiles from the U.S. in 2026. So 4 of these bases that they are building will be in southern Taiwan counties that are located on the Taiwan Strait and facing China. So they'll be on the West Coast. 4 separate contracts worth $148 million have been awarded to build these bases. The other base is going to be on the East Coast, and there has not been a contract for that yet. This just goes to show, Taiwan's own military buildup. And there was apparently plans to build a sixth base in the southwestern county of Yunlin, but it faced a lot of local opposition. People were worried that if you build this base here and there's a war, that means we're going to get targeted, which is definitely a legitimate concern. So this just comes, this is a part of the world I want to kind of focus on more. And these U.S. arms sales have increased in recent years, and the U.S. started giving Taiwan military aid last year. So we're going to see more of this stuff. And the U.S. might also be involved in some kind of construction of a weapons stockpile in Taiwan. I think they're going to kind of keep the details on the down low, but we might learn more about that as time goes on, leaks to the media and stuff. All right, so the next one here, China says that it has no intention of breaching Japan's airspace. So this article is from the South China Morning Post. So the other day, Japan accused a Chinese plane of breaching its territorial airspace, which extends 12 miles off the coast. And China seems to be denying that they did that. And this is one of Japan's remote islands where this happened. So China says it has spoken with Japan and has no intention of violating any airspace after Tokyo claimed a People's Liberation Army reconnaissance plane had made an utterly unacceptable incursion. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Lin Zhan told reporters in Beijing on Tuesday that the two sides had maintained communications through existing working channels and said, quote, "I'd like to stress that China has no intention of breaching any country's airspace," end quote. So Japan said on Monday that a Chinese military Y-9 reconnaissance plane had entered its airspace off the Danzhou Islands, an uninhabited archipelago about 160 kilometers to the southwest of Nagasaki on the southern island of Kyushu. The Japanese Defense Ministry alleged the PLA aircraft had crossed into the East China Sea Islands territorial airspace, which extends 12 nautical miles from their coast, for about 2 minutes. It said fighter jets were scrambled in response, but there was no confrontation between the two sides. So Japan called it a serious violation, said they were very, very unhappy about it. But again, China appears to be denying it or saying, we didn't mean to do it. It wasn't intentional. If they were just in there for 2 minutes. And Chinese planes do fly around the East China Sea, but apparently this is the first time they came within that 12-mile limit. And China and Japan have their own, similar dispute in the East China Sea, similar to the South China Sea over the Senkaku Islands. That's a whole nother thing. I'm sure we'll be covering that again soon as well. All right, so the next story here, Khamenei opens door to direct talks with the U.S. So on Tuesday, Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei opened the door to talks with the U.S., telling the new Iranian government that there was no harm in engaging with the enemy. So Iran's new president, Masoud Pezeshkian, I always have trouble with his name, Pezeshkian, he pledged during his campaign that he would work to get U.S. and other Western sanctions lifted. And he said that he wanted direct engagement, direct talks with the U.S., as opposed to the indirect talks that the Biden administration has held with Iran. Pezeshkian appeared to get Khamenei's blessing to make the effort to negotiate. So Khamenei said, and this is at a meeting, again, with the new government, he said, quote, "This does not mean that we cannot interact with the same enemy in certain situations. There is no harm in that, but do not place your hopes in them. Do not trust the enemy," end quote. So while you have Pezeshkian willing to talk with the U.S., it is unclear if he will have a willing partner. The Biden administration, they're not expected to make any moves toward Iran, towards talks with Iran before November. And if you look at the new Democratic platform, it's incredibly hawkish on Iran, calling Trump weak, saying he was weak for not responding to the missiles that Iran fired at a U.S. base in response to the U.S. killing Soleimani, pledging to defend Israel from Iran and all this stuff. So they're running on a very tough on Iran platform, and so are the Republicans. I think we wouldn't get an idea of if the Trump administration would want any talks with Iran until if, say, Trump won and if he started filling out his cabinet. During his administration, Trump was very hawkish on Iran. He tore up the nuclear deal, reimposed sanctions, killed Soleimani, very hawkish. And Biden has essentially continued that. And, of course, recently there's been a lot of airstrikes against Iran's allies in the region. And it's one thing, the Republicans, they go after Biden so much on Iran, using these kind of false talking points about him giving them money. Some of these situations are as simple as the U.S. allowing Iraq to pay its electric bill to Iran, and Iraq needs that electricity. And then that'll get spun as the U.S. giving Iran, that money. So the political landscape in the U.S. is just not conducive to holding talks with Iran if you're trying to win an election, unfortunately. So we'll see. And, of course, this comes amid, the U.S. is still saying it's expecting Iran to launch a retaliatory attack against Israel for the killing of Ismail Haniyeh on Iranian soil. All right, so the last story here, Haditha massacre photos that the U.S. did not want the world to see. So this is from the New Yorker, and this is about a massacre committed by U.S. Marines in Iraq back in 2005. So on the morning of November 19th, 2005, a squad of Marines was traveling in 4 Humvees down a road in the town of Haditha, Iraq, when their convoy hit an IED. The blast killed 1 Marine, Lance Corporal Miguel Terrazas, and injured 2 others. What followed would spark one of the largest war crime investigations in the history of the U.S. During the next several hours, Marines killed 24 Iraqi men, women, and children. Near the site of the explosion, they shot 5 men who had been driving to a college in Baghdad. They entered 3 nearby homes and killed nearly everyone inside. The youngest victim was a 3-year-old girl. The oldest was a 76-year-old man. The Marines would later claim that they were fighting insurgents that day, but the dead were all civilians. After the killing was over, 2 other Marines set off to document the aftermath. And so they went site to site, marking bodies with numbers and then photographing them. Other Marines, including one who worked in intelligence, also photographed the scene. By the time they were done, they had made a collection of photographs that would be the most powerful evidence against their fellow Marines. The killings came to be known as the Haditha Massacre. 4 Marines were charged with murder, but those charges were later dropped. General James Mattis, who went on to become the Secretary of Defense, wrote a glowing letter to one of the Marines dismissing his charges and declaring him innocent. By 2012, when the final case ended in a plea deal with no prison sentence, the Iraq War was over. That Iraq War was over. The U.S. is still went back in Iraq and it's still there today. And stories about the legacy of the U.S. occupation rarely got much attention. The news barely registered. The impact of an alleged war crime is often directly related to the horror of the images that end up in the hands of the public. So the U.S. military was hiding these photos, and now they have them 2024, almost 20 years later. And so this is pretty gruesome stuff. But they have the photos here of the bodies, and this first one, again, this is gruesome. I mean, these are dead bodies that we're looking at here. The first one is a 5-year-old girl who was shot in the head by a U.S. Marine. Then a mother surrounded by her dead children in a family bedroom. Again, the youngest was a 3-year-old girl. It's just a completely horrific massacre. So if you have the time and the stomach for it, you could go check that out. All right, so that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our viewpoints. One from Andy Corbley, Kursk offensive to be part of Zelensky's victory plan. One from Ted Snyder, the U.S. is being accused of 3 coups. One from Hanin Majadil, Israeli journalists are silent about the killings of reporters in Gaza. One from Doug Bandow, the new National Defense Report misses the point. One from James W. Carden, Kamala and Gaza, all words and no deeds make a divided party. So that's everything for me for today. Please go, if you want to support antiwar.com, share this show, tell your friends, like, subscribe, comment, follow us on X, Instagram. Lots of great posts over there on Instagram. I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.